a lot of fighting. And this stopped a lot of fighting. When that happened, it was a whole different ballgame. And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals that they're going to be tariffed if they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%.
I think there are two bits of this. There's the new tariffs of 200% on Australian exports to the US. Now, most of our pharmaceutical exports are actually blood plasma, and some vaccine products, mostly from CSL.
Donald Trump is making a 200% bet with your healthcare. He claims it will slash the price of your prescriptions overnight. But what if he's not just wrong? What if his bluff is poised to make your medicine completely unaffordable? We're about to show you how this high-stakes political gamble could backfire and why the rest of the world isn't buying it. This isn't just about politics or international trade. This is about the price you pay at the pharmacy counter. It's about that heart-stopping moment when you're told a life-saving drug costs more than your car. It's about a system that feels broken and a proposed solution that sounds so simple, so tough, and so American. A 200% tariff on imported drugs to punish countries that get them cheap and force the pharmaceutical giants to give America a fair deal. It's a powerful message. But behind the curtain of this political theater, a very different story is playing out. A story where this tariff bluff doesn't just fail to lower your costs, but could trigger a chain reaction of shortages, price hikes, and a full-blown medical trade war that America is not prepared to win. We're going to expose how this monumental gamble was likely doomed from the start by looking at the two countries at the center of this storm, our closest allies, Canada and Australia. Their reactions are the canary in the coal mine, and they're telling us one thing loud and clear. This plan could backfire spectacularly. Act 1. The problem and the bluff. To understand the appeal of the bluff, you first have to understand the pain. It's a pain that is uniquely and profoundly American. It's the story of a parent rationing their child's insulin. It's the story of a senior cutting pills in half, trying to make a 30-day supply last for 60. It's the story of a cancer patient staring at a bill for a single infusion that costs more than their college education. This isn't an exaggeration, it's the lived reality for millions. The United States accounts for roughly 5% of the world's population, yet it shoulders about 70% of the entire globe's pharmaceutical profits. Let that sink in. For decades, Americans have been paying, on average, close to 3 to 4 times more for the exact same brand name drugs than people in other developed countries. The same pill, made in the same factory, sold by the same company, can cost a fraction of the price in Europe compared to the United States. This isn't a glitch in the system. For a long time, it has been the system. This disparity creates a deep, burning sense of injustice, a feeling that Americans are being taken for a ride, that our wealth is being exploited to let other nations free ride on our healthcare system. It's a potent political narrative because it contains a kernel of truth. The enormous profits generated in the largely unregulated U.S. market do, in fact, subsidize the massive costs of research and development for new drugs that benefit the entire world. But the conclusion drawn from that truth is where the bluff begins. And so, onto this stage of legitimate public anger enters the grand proposal, the 200% pharma tariff. The concept, as presented, is brutally simple. It's a form of economic shock therapy. The argument goes like this. For years, countries like Canada and Australia have used their government-run health systems to negotiate incredibly low drug prices. Big Pharma agrees because they can always make up for it by charging exorbitant rates in the US. The tariff is designed to break this cycle. By threatening to slap a 200% tax on drugs imported from these countries, the plan aims to do two things. First, it's meant to punish those nations for what is framed as unfair pricing. The goal is to enforce a most favored nation concept, suggesting no country should get a better deal than America. The message is clear. The free ride is over. Second, and more critically, the tariff is designed to be a weapon pointed directly at the heart of Big Pharma. The threat is that companies will no longer be able to manufacture drugs cheaply in places like Ireland or Germany, sell them for a small profit in Canada, and then make a killing in the US faced with a 200% tariff. These companies would have two choices. Either eat the massive tax or, as the theory goes, bring their manufacturing and jobs back to the United States to avoid the tariff altogether. together. It's presented as a win-win. Drug prices go down, and American manufacturing comes roaring back. This is the political bluff. It's a high-stakes poker move on a global scale, designed to sound tough and pro-American. It speaks directly to the frustration of voters who know the system is rigged against them. It transforms a complex problem of healthcare economics into a simple narrative of fighting back against foreign freeloaders and greedy corporations. And that is why it is so seductive. It offers a single, powerful action to solve a problem that has bedeviled policymakers for generations. No more complicated negotiations. No more tinkering with reimbursement rates. Just a big, beautiful tariff. The problem is, a global supply chain, a network built over decades and worth over $1 trillion, doesn't bend to rhetoric. It responds to incentives, logistics, and the cold, hard math of global trade. And that math tells a very different story. A story of how this bluff isn't just a miscalculation, but a direct threat to the health and wealth of the very people it claims to protect. Act 2, the agitation, the backfire. The central promise of the 200% tariff is that it will force the world to bend to America's will, lowering prices for U.S. consumers. But the bluff isn't working that way. In fact, the early signs suggest it's poised to backfire spectacularly. And the first undeniable signs of this aren't coming from Pfizer's boardrooms or the halls of Congress. They are coming loud and clear from our closest allies, the very nations this policy is meant to strong-arm. Their reactions are not just diplomatic disagreements, they are logical, predictable, and devastating to the core premise of the tariff bluff. Let's start with our neighbor to the north, Canada. For years, Canada has been an informal lifeline for many Americans struggling with high drug costs. The idea of legalizing bulk importation from Canada has been floated for years. The tariff strategy is meant to be a more aggressive version of this, but it makes a fatal assumption that Canada would simply stand by and let its drug supply be drained. Canada's response has been the political equivalent of a slammed door. Politely, of course, but firmly. Canadian officials have made their position unequivocally clear. Their primary responsibility is to their own 40 million citizens, not the 330 million in the United States. They have warned repeatedly that any U.S. policy that threatens their domestic drug supply will be met with immediate and decisive action. And they've already put laws in place to prove it. Canada has regulations that explicitly prohibit the export of drugs if that sale could cause or worsen a shortage at home. The Canadian government's stance is that their country, which accounts for only 2% of global drug sales, cannot possibly serve as the low-cost pharmacy for the largest market on Earth without creating a catastrophic health crisis for its own people. Think about what this means. The tariff bluff assumes the U.S. can use its market power to force Canada's hand, but Canada is responding by taking its hand off the table entirely. They are preparing to build a wall around their supply, not ship more drugs. If the U.S. pushes, Canada will push back by restricting exports. The result is the complete opposite of the intended effect. One analyst from the C.D. Howe Institute modeled what would happen if the U.S. successfully forced Canada into a pricing scheme. The result? A potential 216% price increase for drugs in Canada, as pharmaceutical companies would be forced to raise Canadian prices to protect their much larger American profits. It would be a disaster for Canadians and offer almost no relief to Americans. Now let's fly halfway across the world to another of America's key allies, Australia. If Canada's reaction was a polite, "Sorry, no," Australia's has been a more blunt, "Mate, you're hurting yourself." Australian officials and industry leaders have described the proposed tariffs as very concerning and fundamentally self-defeating. To understand why, you need to understand Australia's system, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, or PBS. Under the PBS, the Australian government acts as a single, massive buyer, negotiating directly with drug companies for every medicine it covers. If a company wants access to the Australian market, it has to agree to a price the government deems fair and cost-effective. American pharmaceutical lobbying groups have called this system egregious and discriminatory, precisely because it works so well at keeping prices low. So when faced with the tariff threat, Australia's reaction wasn't to scrap their successful system. It was to double down on defending it. Both major political parties have stated in no uncertain terms that the PBS is non-negotiable and not something that we're willing to trade away. But their argument goes deeper. A 200% tariff isn't a surgical strike on a foreign product. It's a tax on a global network that American patients depend on. Pharmaceutical products are one of Australia's largest exports to the United States. This includes complex biologics, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and specialty drugs that are part of a manufacturing process spanning the globe. A company like CSL, a major Australian-based biotech firm, manufactures treatments that are vital for U.S. health security. Slapping a 200% tariff on them doesn't just hurt Australia, it risks disrupting the supply of essential medicines for Americans. So let's connect the dots. The agitation is clear. The bluff intended to project strength is revealing a profound weakness, a misunderstanding of how the world actually works. Canada's reaction proves that you cannot force a smaller country to sacrifice its own citizens' health for your benefit. They will protect themselves. Australia's reaction proves that you cannot attack a global supply chain without blowing a hole in your own boat. This isn't a path to lower drug prices. This is a path to drug shortages. It's a path where the costs of this chaos will inevitably be passed down to one group, the American consumer. Act 3. Why the bluff was doomed from the start. So why is this happening? Why would a policy that sounds so tough be destined to do the exact opposite of what it promises? To understand that, we need to look past the political speeches and examine the fundamental mechanics of the $1 trillion global pharmaceutical machine. When you do, you realize this tariff threat wasn't just a bad bet, it was a bet made against the laws of economic gravity. The entire strategy is built on a misunderstanding of why drugs are so expensive in America. The core of the problem isn't what other countries are paying, it's what the United States is not doing. For decades, an unspoken deal has governed the global pharmaceutical industry. The high, largely unregulated prices that drug companies can charge in the U.S. effectively subsidize research and development for the entire planet. It can cost billions of dollars and take over a decade to bring a new drug to market. That massive investment has to be recouped. Pharmaceutical companies do this by launching new patented drugs in the U.S. first, at the highest price the market will bear. Because the U.S. government, unlike the governments of Canada, Australia, and every major European nation, is largely prohibited from negotiating prices for programs like Medicare, the market will bear can mean almost anything. Once the company has established this massive revenue stream in America, it can then afford to sell the same drug to other countries for much less. It's an arrangement that has been called global freeloading on the back of the American patient, and while that sounds unfair, it's the engine that has powered pharmaceutical innovation for half a century. The 200% tariff bluff fundamentally misreads this engine. It assumes you can throw a wrench in it and make the car go faster. A tariff doesn't change the underlying business model, it just adds a new cost. Faced with a 200% tax, a pharmaceutical company isn't going to suddenly call up the German government and demand a higher price. Their most profitable market remains the United States, so they will do what any rational business would do: protect that market. The most likely outcome is that they pass the cost of the tariff directly on into the American healthcare system. The price of the drug goes up, insurers pay more, and those costs are passed to you in the form of higher premiums and copays. This leads to the second fatal flaw. The tariff logic completely ignores the real root of high prices, which is the U.S. patent system and lack of government negotiation. A tariff does absolutely nothing to change this. It doesn't shorten patent life. It doesn't allow Medicare to negotiate prices. It's like trying to fix a broken bone with a Band-Aid. You're addressing a surface wound while ignoring the fundamental structural damage. Finally, the bluff is doomed because it's based on a fiction. The idea that this is a simple fight between America and the rest of the world. The pharmaceutical industry is not American or Irish or Swiss. It is a stateless global entity. The supply chain for a single pill can start with chemicals from China, processed in India, manufactured in Ireland, and finally imported into the United States for sale. Who exactly does a 200% tariff punish here? It punishes the American patient who needs that pill. The idea of forcing these companies to bring all of this back to the U.S. with a proposed 18-month grace period isn't just unrealistic, it's a fantasy. Building a single high-tech pharmaceutical manufacturing plant can take 5 to 10 years and cost up to $2 billion. The notion that an entire global industry will reshore itself based on a tariff threat is simply not grounded in reality. And that is the ultimate explanation. The 200% pharma bluff is a political narrative clashing with economic reality. It's an attempt to solve a domestic policy failure with a foreign policy tool. The consequences, as Canada and Australia have already signaled, will not be what was promised. They will likely be higher costs, greater instability, and increased risk for the American people. If you're tired of paying more for your meds than your mortgage, if you believe that healthcare should be about health, not just wealth, then this conversation is just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that demands more than bluffs and political theater. We break down the systems that control our lives because knowledge is the first step toward change. And please drop your wildest pharma price story in the comments below. Sharing these experiences is vital because in this high-stakes game, your story matters. It's the evidence that can't be ignored. And trust me, it's the only thing here that's still free. So let's step back and look at the full picture. We started with a problem every American feels in their bones: the outrageous cost of prescription drugs. We were then presented with a solution that was bold and powerfully simple: a 200% tariff designed to punish other countries and force big pharma to its knees. It was framed as a high-stakes gamble to finally put America first. But as we've seen, this was never a viable gamble. It was a bluff, and a bluff built on a foundation of flawed assumptions. It misunderstood the fierce determination of our allies, like Canada and Australia, to protect their own citizens and their own successful healthcare systems. It ignored the complex, interwoven reality of a global supply chain, where an attack on one link sends shockwaves through the entire network, ultimately harming the end consumer. Most importantly, it ignored the fundamental truth of the American healthcare system. The crisis of affordability is not an imported problem. It is a homegrown one, born from a unique system that prioritizes pharmaceutical profits over negotiating power and patent monopolies over patient access. The 200% tariff doesn't fix that. It is a distraction from it. In the best-case scenario, it would be ineffective. In the far more likely scenario, it would be a catastrophe, triggering the very price hikes and shortages it was supposed to prevent. The path to affordable medicine in the United States will not be found in a trade war with our friends. It will be found in the difficult, necessary work of systemic reform at home. It requires looking at the models that work in other countries, not as systems to be punished, but as systems to learn from. It requires empowering our own government to negotiate on our behalf, just as every other developed nation does. This isn't about being weak or ceding ground. It's about being smart. It's about understanding that in the 21st century, economic strength comes from savvy negotiation and strategic partnerships, not from building walls and firing off tariff cannons. When it comes to the medicine that keeps us alive and healthy, a bluff isn't just a losing bet, it's a dangerous one. And it's a danger that Americans simply cannot afford. Subscribe for more.